32? BJ! All right. Today we're standing here to announce that City Council, by unanimous vote, has stood up for workers all across the city who are fighting for the right to a living wage. I want to thank the courageous workers, service employees here who filled our council chambers, who are surrounding us today, who filled our chambers last week to talk about what it meant and spoke passionately about the need for this city to deal with poverty in its most meaningful way, and that is to raise the wages of workers. This bill, which will expand prevailing wage to all employees of hospitals, universities, airports, the port, and stadiums that take a public subsidy or are sold public land, ensures that, in the words of SEIU's leader, Gabe Morgan, that hundreds of workers will go from the working poor to the working class. That is public policy in action. It can't just be seen that wealth is interpreted as those who see their wages increase at the top end. That is not growing wealth of our communities. Growing wealth means that all sectors of our economy see improvement in their wages, and that has to fundamentally start and rise from the bottom. These workers today are helping us do that. They are at the vanguard of ensuring that workers all across the region, service employees, janitors, maintenance workers, security guards in particular, are going to see their circumstances changed, and they were at the forefront of fighting for it. I'm proud to say that City Council is embarking on a reinvigorated agenda to tackle the chasm of inequality that divides our city. This bill represents a sincere effort on the part of city government to fight back against the unequal distribution of resources that for too long has forced so many to live on so little. We can no longer allow our public resources to subsidize poverty wages. We're sending a message to every institution and to leadership that we have to live up to our responsibilities as neighbors, as partners, as citizens to support the communities in which we operate. And especially if we are taking public subsidies, that we cannot undercut what is a prevailing wage and should continue to be increasing wages in our city. I want to thank especially my fellow council members, the sponsors of this bill, Council members Curtis Jones, Councilwoman Maria Quinones Sanchez, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, Councilwoman Sherelle Parker, and all members of council who unanimously supported this. I want to acknowledge council members Blackwell and Squilla who are here to join us in this press conference, and to the many citizens all across the city who are demanding that this is a city that responds to the needs of its residents, to its most vulnerable, and demands that the right to a fair and living wage is not only a victory for Philadelphia, but for this nation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jean Duval. I'd like to thank City Council for voting in favor of the working people. A special thank you to Councilwoman Gym and co-sponsors of the bill for introducing it. Passing this bill is going to be a big relief to officers across the city. It's a step towards, getting out of poverty and to a better life. It'll vastly improve the security industry and create good jobs and make it good jobs, for us across the city, protecting everybody. Many officers will no longer need government assistance or to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. It may not mean much to many, but it sure means a lot to us, who for years gave up quality time with our families. More quality time with our families means a better quality of life. Now we can provide all our needs at home. This passage brought the holidays sooner for us, like an early Christmas. But not just the holidays, but every day it'll be a little more joyous for us. Again, thank you for proving that this city is a city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Good day.
Every member of council wins because of their constituents. When they have a living wage, can afford the basics of life. But the reason why I support this, and it comes down to a barbershop. There was a young guy in there with his son, and he could afford a haircut. And they talked about the future. They talked about things like sneakers and sports programs that he now could afford to put his child in. Those little things may not mean much to trumped up trickle-down economics, but to people on the in the real world, it is a matter of the quality of life and sometimes even life and death. So these things do not go by unnoticed by the average worker that you pass by on the L, that you see at the supermarket, that can make a choice between buying detergent and milk, not buying detergent or milk. This matters. And a lot of times we forget that. And if you forget that, remember this, City Council will find you and remind you.
Of the 10,000 members of SEIU 32BJ in the city of Philadelphia, but more importantly, on behalf of the thousands and thousands of property service workers, union and non-union, that this council has taken steps today that will lift them out of poverty, I want to say thank you. To all those workers and the workers in the city, I want to remind them of one thing. When you fight, you can win. We've fought at the airport, and we've seen workers at the airport see their wages increase. All across this country, fast food workers have been fighting for 15. And now yet another group of workers who fought will have won what will be $15 an hour for security officers. And that's the thing I hope people will take away. If you are working in poverty right now, get up and fight. Come down to this council. They will fight with you. SEIU, we will fight with you. But you have to fight for yourself. And when you fight, we win. Thank you.
32 BJ 32 BJ 32 BJ 32 BJ 32 BJ 32 BJ. Listen, I'm just proud to have the opportunity to be a part of sponsoring this bill, primarily focusing on service workers who are the backbone of our local economy. So it's only right that workers receive a prevailing wage here in the city of Philadelphia, and for the corporations that are here that receive tax breaks on behalf of the taxpayers here in the city of Philadelphia, they have a social and moral and economic responsibility to provide a prevailing wage to the people who help expand their bottom line. And so to Gabe, let's give Gabe a round of applause for his leadership and making sure that, and his team as a whole, for lobbying members of the City Council to make sure that we pass a bill that will support our security workers and all service workers as a whole. And I want to also thank my colleague, who I'm so proud of, Councilwoman Helen Gym, for stepping up to the plate and leading this charge. Thank you very much.
Let me first thank God for this wonderful day, the passage of this most important bill, and my colleagues. Thank you, Helen Gym. She's been a real fighter from the second she showed her face, and we are so proud that she's part of our body. 32 BJ, you've always been the group that's always fighting with the people, standing up and not afraid. All of us have to do our part. Right now, I'm fighting in my area, the university area, for more jobs, for greater numbers of inclusion, and across the board, if we all do our part, no matter where we are. If I miss something, then Helen Gym picks it up. If I miss something, then Kenyatta Johnson picks it up. But know that you can count on us. We're for you. We believe you. We know that we're all brothers and sisters, and that when we work together, we'll win. God bless you all.
I want to say, too, that this is a great opportunity to show when people work together what can happen.
That's right.
You know, there's a lot of things that happen in council, and it's so nice that when you see bipartisanship working in the right direction for the working class people of our city. It's so important when you see a 17-0 vote on something that means so much for the people who live in our city. We have great opportunities here in Philadelphia, and all we're saying with this bill is that if you take some tax dollars, you need to give back to the working people, and you need to give back to our residents of the city of Philadelphia. And that's the most important thing that we had today. This is just a start. You'll see a lot more of this moving forward. But again, this takes leadership. We want to thank Gabe from SEIU, 32BJ.
Yes, okay.
We want to thank Helen Ginn for leading the charge, along with all the council members that supported this great initiative. So thank you so much for letting me play a small role, and happy to vote to support this great legislation. Congratulations.
So when you come into the city and you ask for public subsidies, you now understand that you're going to be required to lift the property service workers, who are often some of the lowest paid workers in these big buildings that are being subsidized. You're going to be required to give them a prevailing wage. And so we expect that over time, and not over a long time, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, as based on the past history has been, that really most of the major institutions and landlords in the city will have to pay prevailing wage because most of them are routinely coming in and getting all kinds of public subsidies. A prevailing wage is one of two things. It's either what the majority of workers in a market are making, or it's a standard set by the Federal Service Contract Act. And in this law, it says whichever is greater. So if a majority of people in a given industry in the private sector are making $15 an hour, if you want a public subsidy, you got to pay that too. But if the Federal Service Contract Act says that rate should be $15.50, then you have to pay that. Because the idea behind it all is to say, we're going to give you money, we want to see development happen, but we want to make sure you're creating good jobs. The trade here is, if you want public money, we need to guarantee you're going to create good jobs. And doing that in a targeted way to those industries that you can do that in. And so that's what this law does.
And I think one of the concerns has been is that when we give away tax subsidies to large entities, what we're seeing is that they actually undercut the prevailing wage, which is set by the private market, and or by the federal standards. And what we cannot have is have the tax subsidy be used as a loophole to ensure that folks live in poverty, and that would be a terrible usage of it. And so this is one step to reverse that type of trend and make sure that those who receive tax subsidies are pushing it towards true development, expansion, and growth rather than undercutting workers and getting by on that way.
So one, this applies to whether you're union or non-union. Mm-hmm. So this helps obviously folks who are in a union, but the idea here is to lift people in Philly out of poverty, not just union members. So whether you're a cleaner, as an example, a janitor who's union or non-union, if you're at a site the prevailing wage applies, you will get the prevailing wage. We didn't write the law to say union only. The second is, as an example, in this city, going to what Councilman Gym said, the vast majority of large building owners are already paying janitors $18 an hour with decent benefit because those janitors are union and organized and fight. But what this would mean is that's the prevailing rate. So if you were a non-union janitor at a publicly subsidized building, this would extend and would lift you up to what union janitors are making, because that's the prevailing rate. It's what the majority of people in the industry are making. Because what's actually happened, ironically, is those big building owners who are getting the least tax subsidies have actually been paying people the most in order to have a better service. And it's been those folks who've been getting public handouts who've actually been paying janitors, security officers the least, which is not good economics for anyone. No. If you have any industry, pick an industry, where you have people making a decent wage, you don't want to use public money to undercut a base of good jobs. You want to use public money around the edges to lift up a good base of jobs.
Public money was meant to go towards the development, expansion, growth of industry, not to subsidize poverty wages. And that's the most important thing. If that's the direction that they're being used in, we want to cut that off immediately. So if it's sending a clear message that tax subsidies are out there. They're supposed to be used for the kind of growth options that they're supposed to be moving us towards. But in the poorest large city in the United States of America, we're not going to use subsidies to subsidize poverty wages. It is going to move a significant number of people up. I think some of the estimates are 1 point some
a move, we think about 2,000 people up, and it will actually literally bring in millions of dollars into Philly's neighborhoods. The other reason why this makes sense is because almost everyone who works in this industry in Philly, almost everybody who works in every big shiny object you see, is someone who lives in Philly. It's folks who live in northwest, southwest Philly. And so these are jobs, it's a whole industry where the majority of people working it are city residents, and they're taking care of the wealthiest people's stuff. And what you're actually doing here is making it so that they actually get a benefit and those neighborhoods get a benefit from that development, because you're putting money in the neighborhood residents' pockets. Folks like our members and 32BJ.
We already have a law in the books where it applies to commercial office buildings. We're expanding that so that it applies to more people. It's also important to understand that all of these people who are here are not only Philadelphia residents, they're parents, they take care of folks, they are living in our neighborhoods and homes, are revitalizing their areas. Every dollar that goes into our pockets is an economic boon for Philadelphia because it gets spent in our communities and neighborhoods, amongst our businesses. It helps feed our kids, get them the things they need for their education, and it puts money back into our tax coffers. You know, it puts that money as wages go up, we will take in more in taxes, wages and taxes. So it's important that it be seen that increasing wealth of residents isn't seen as some kind of charitable venture. It's actually smart economic policy, and especially when it's tied to tax subsidies. It's important and critical accountability measures to ensure that everything, the wealth truly expands in the way we want to define real wealth.
Further, if you don't, that's right. And if you don't want to lift your security officers and janitors out of poverty, then don't ask for any public money. This doesn't tell you what to do with your own money. If you're just rich and you want to make everyone else poor in your building, you're free to do that as long as you want. This law says if you want money from the city, you've got to create good jobs for people in the city. If I came to the city routinely for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, am I going to get up in that room and say, no, I want to keep all the security officers poor? So I wasn't surprised that we didn't see that much actual opposition in council today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Way to go!